Hi there, unlearners. Welcome to this episode of the Unlearners podcast with myself, Zanele Njapa, the Unlearning Lady. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for taking a slice out of your life to join us for this conversation, whether you are listening or watching this conversation. Today, very much true to the conversation we've been having for the entire season, we are going to talk about, and this for me, Bronwyn, you and I, maybe let me just take a little bit of a side ramp here. You and I had a conversation on a podcast, I think it was probably 5 years ago, which is so weird. It feels like a full circle moment, but thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are talking about qualifications versus skill, the real currency of the future, because this season is all around education, shifting the way we perceive education, how individuals learn, but also whether or not we are learning the correct way. But you especially, because of your background, and just to introduce Bronwyn, see now I've stuck right in. Just to introduce Bronwyn, Bronwyn is a futurist and economist from Flux Trends, and they really help organizations and professionals to understand and decode the future. Today, I want to talk to you about qualifications versus skill, Bronwyn, because you really understand key macro, micro trends that are really helping individuals to think about what's the best thing to learn, what's the best way to learn, and whether we're doing it right or not. So let's start here.
The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow. Learn, change, grow. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.
Welcome to the Unlearners podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So let's start with that very first question. What do you feel is the key difference between qualification and skill? And what do you feel the balance is between the two if you look at where we're going as a global economy, if there is ever a global economy? You know, this is the other question. But what do you feel is the relationship between the two? Is there one that's probably a heavyweight that's changing how valuable it is over time?
Well, what we have to understand about qualifications is qualifications are a proxy for a skill. So in other words, they're a signal or signifier to the market, whether that market be an employer or be a client, that you have some sort of a skill. But a qualification is not a skill, right? So we need these signifiers because we don't have trust in our economies, right? If I don't know you, if I've never met you before, and you say, I'm Zanele and I am an unlearning expert, and I go, justify that. Unless I know you personally or I have seen your track record or your demonstrated skill in the marketplace, I'm going to look for some evidence that you have the skills that you claim to have. And as such, we have a fetishized the qualification, the piece of paper, as a means of proof that you have that skill. But this is not true necessarily, in that especially in the days of agentic AI, there's no guarantee that someone even who has a master's degree actually understands any of the content that is supposed to have been taught within their program, because there are so many ways to cheat. You can pay people in Nigeria to write your PhD thesis for you, and you can get that piece of paper, you can get that certification, but still nonetheless the market is looking for those signifiers to prove that they're investing in a person that has what they say they are, because we can go out and claim. You can be an influencer, you can claim whatever you like, you can have no skills and you can claim to have those skills. So we look for those pieces of proof, but those pieces of proof are not the same thing as having that skill. By the same token, there are people that don't have certifications that do have skills. Like my business partner, Dion, does not have a master's degree, and yet he consults to MBA students and he lectures and teaches to people because he has demonstrated skill and he has a reputation that's come with it. And what we're starting to see now is that our markets, whether again that be your clients or your employer, are starting to understand that qualification or that certification as a proxy is flawed. It's flawed because it hides incompetence, but also because it discounts competence, right? So ultimately, we do need to have skills. And what is a skill? A skill is something valuable to someone else. It's the ability to deliver value. And that's where we all should be focusing. Now, sometimes getting a qualification, doing a training program can help you develop a skill, but only if you actually take it seriously, if you don't cheat, if you don't buy the shortcut, if you actually do the work. You can learn a valuable skill that will allow you to be valuable to your market. But there are other ways to do that too, in terms of getting things like micro-credentials or just on-the-ground experience. Like your background is education, you're still kind of in the education space, but you're not exactly doing what you studied. You've developed your reputation based on doing work and developing and practicing your skill, and you've therefore become valuable to your clients. And that's the journey all of us have to go on to figure out how we can be valuable and add value, but also be valued by our market, whatever that market might be. And sometimes that means might be going through formal education, getting that certification, but sometimes there are other journeys we could go on that could actually develop more return on your investment, both of capital, because education is expensive, and your time, because education is really expensive in terms of time for both yourself and the people that you work with and for going forward. And we really need to reevaluate the sorts of skills and certifications that we are investing our precious time and money in to see that they are delivering that return for ourselves and that value to our end user.
Yeah, I like so much of the things that you've mentioned there, Bronwyn, because what's coming to mind for me is how much of and I don't mean this in the conventional blended approach that we would speak about in education, but it is sounding to me like institutions more especially are really needing to take a big role, right? And step up in terms of how they organize and how they sell. And I like how you painted that picture of one, it's you, but it's also how you're received and perceived by the marketplace based on that blend of one, the qualifications where they count, but also the capacity to demonstrate skill. So let's talk a little bit about institutions and whether you feel, especially now with generative AI, there's so many different things that we are seeing around how students are able to, and maybe the word here isn't cheat that I like to use, but how they are able to outsource where they can in order to get the job done. What does that look like? What does it look like for institutions to go, we understand the pace of technology, we understand how the world is moving around us. How do we start to create some kind of an approach that helps the market, that helps organizations to shift how they perceive skill versus qualification?
Well, this is something we talk about with all of our clients and anyone going into sort of this world of technology that we have, and the reality that none of these tools are disappearing and going away. The point is that if your degree program can be done on autopilot, what value is it really providing in terms of skills for your students? And what value is it providing in terms of that proxy, that marker of quality for the market? That essentially is what you're paying for. So your stamp from a good university kind of says to the job markets, to the employment market, to the client market, this is a quality candidate that understands their stuff. And if you are passing students who don't understand their stuff going into the marketplace, of course your reputation is going to be damaged, right? And the same thing for a student. So using technology to accelerate your progress, to of course fast track your understanding, to get the job done better, faster, at a higher quality, no problem. But at the same time, what's the point of doing a degree program that you don't have to actually do, right? So what is the value you're really buying? Are you just cynically buying that stamp, that certification, or are you really becoming a more valuable player to the marketplace, right? And we see this breaking down. So AI has just kind of accelerated a long-term trend. I'm not sure how many of your listeners and viewers are aware that as of last year, we had the first generation of Americans. We're talking about a rich first world country. First generation of Americans retiring with student debt. So imagine you got a degree in your 20s. You're now almost 70 years old and you're still paying back that student loan. Your market value did not increase along with your debt repayments or the interest rates. That degree was a waste of your time. It was a waste of your money. It was probably a waste of your country's time too, because most higher education is subsidized by governments and taxpayers, right? So clearly that wasn't working. And we're talking about people here retiring at 65, 70 who got their degrees in like the 80s, right? So that was when education was cheaper, when technology wasn't what it is now. So the question now, sort of fast track to our generation, like, 40 years in the future, and what is the value of what we're doing? And higher education institutions have to redefine their value proposition the same way that individuals and students have to justify their value to the market.
Gone are the days when we can say, oh no, soft skills are not a priority. Let's focus in on knowing what we're doing. Because if your team doesn't quite understand how to show up, then whatever technical skills they have really are not going to make the difference. So go over to theunlearners.com or email our team at programs@theunlearners.com to schedule a quick call with me, Zanele Njapa, the Unlearning Lady, to have a conversation about which key skills your team is looking for right now to supercharge your success going into the next decade. I can't wait to work with you.
So universities are failing as a marker of quality at the moment because they haven't figured out how to veto quality in a technological world, but they're also failing to deliver value to the people who are paying them to make them more valuable to the marketplace, right? So if you are considering higher education at the moment, really consider that investment of your time and, of course, of your money. That are you really going to get out of it what you think you used to get out of it?
Yeah.
And again, we can take the example of sort of fast tracking your knowledge or getting AI to write your assignments instead of doing them yourself. The more people do that, whether you do it or not, it kind of means that everyone's going to do it because you've got to keep competing. But at the same time, the value of that certification you get at the end, even though you got it easier through less effort, becomes less in the marketplace. Your employers also know what's going on. Recruiters also know that the quality has shifted, which means your price, what you pay for education, stays high, but the value you get out of it in terms of future earnings, in terms of reputation, is declining. And we're all kind of part of that vicious cycle at the moment.
So maybe a good place to start, Bronwyn, and I don't know what your thoughts are around this, is for institutions to maybe look at how they've integrated the two. And I think that this is exactly what you were saying, is maybe to go, okay, these are the qualifications that we offer, this is the value we're trying to give, and maybe cross-compare that with the skills. For example, if we think about how students are now using very much AI, outsourcing to individuals, maybe even outside of the classroom, to write their assignments for, and this has been happening for forever. And that's something we know can generically be done. So a lecturer could very easily say, okay, everybody, get your assignments done, maybe get your papers all written by AI. That's fine. Everyone does it. It's standardized. But then we look at where the gap in the skill is. And then we might go, okay, everyone go back to those assignments that AI wrote. And then in the classroom, without your phones, argue against that. And then you test a skill, because maybe it is a matter of looking at what AI has done to disrupt the organization of the skills, and then how do you then refill those gaps? What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly. So we have to look at different ways to test that people have learned something, and we also have to look at different ways to teach, because at the same time that students are of course taking the shortcut where they can, we got lecturers doing the same thing, right? Getting lecturers to get AI to create their courses, in which case, why do they exist in the system? So the real question, that we've all got to answer for ourselves is, what value are you actually adding? What value are you, and what value are you getting, conversely, when you're the one paying? And when you're a student, you're in an interesting position because you're paying for that education, but you're also hoping to get paid in the future too. And that question of value is just so absolutely critical. Like, as a student, what do you want to get out of this process? Do you just want that certification, or do you want to have the ability to go out and earn a living and add value to a future client's life? And if so, then the responsibility comes to you to say, what skills do I need to focus on challenging for myself, and how do I challenge the university or the lecturer to make sure that they are giving that back to me? But universities also have to have a very hard look at themselves, because content has become commoditized entirely.
Yeah.
We know you can get the Harvard lectures for free online, or off their own website, not even off like a pirated place. The content is free, and it's become so cynical then that you're paying for this very expensive certification that doesn't actually mean anything. So instead, what we're really looking for is, and for what employers are looking for and clients are looking for, is verifiable skills, which is where we get to the sort of new generation education that we speak quite a lot about, things like micro-credentials, even within degree programs that kind of prove competency and ability to solve problems. And those abilities to solve problems become more high level, the more the mid-tier of all professions can become automated. The place where you do actually add value becomes more high tier, it becomes more in solving real people's problems. It comes more in discourse, it comes more in leadership, it comes through more in sales. These are the sorts of things that you have to figure out as you go along. But as you say, universities have to find new ways to test those competences, whether that means going back to the days of sort of ancient Rome and Greece, where you have to actually debate and defend face to face. We could do that. That could be very exciting, very humanizing. Or we see other professors, which is quite interesting, looking at, instead of judging the output of essays, because they're now just making the assumption that every student is using AI to write it. I mean, who wouldn't? And why wouldn't you say that? Instead, they're saying, okay, great, thank you for the essay. Now show me the prompts you used to get there. And they're actually grading the essay based on the prompts the student put into the system, right? So that's clever, isn't it? Although, of course, now students will just figure out, like, okay, tell me the right prompts to get to the right essay. So it becomes a bit of a tail-eating snake as long as you try and fix those problems. But still, ultimately, what we're looking for as a client, as an employer, is someone who's able to think and able to solve the problems you need to solve in the real world. And that means that universities have to, if they are focused or wanting to deliver value to students and to the marketplace, focus on helping students to get ready to plug and play into organizations. So at the moment, universities are failing on two fronts. Graduates are not plug and play into institutions. They have certifications, they don't have skills. And at the same time, we've also got, of course, the fact that there's really two types of education when it comes to higher education. The one is education as self-fulfillment. And you know this, of course, in your coaching work, that you're doing education not as a means towards a job or a means towards a promotion or a means towards a pay raise, but education as an end, like the delight in learning and mastering and understanding things for yourself. And then there's, of course, education as a means to employment. So what we've done in South Africa, we actually did this a lot faster than other places, is we try to conflate those two to try and heal some of the wounds of inequality of the past. We tried to make technical qualifications into degreed programs, and as such watered down the skills in order to inflate the certification. But at the same time, our actual knowledge-based, like the education as an end, the more sort of theoretical education that needs to be supported by non-market returns, because it's only ever going to be an end, not a means, has lost a lot of funding. So we see actual university knowledge being watered down, but we also see skills being watered down. And what we're going to see in the future is that re-separation of understanding very clearly, as a student, what am I going to university to? Am I going to university on a quest to understand the meaning of life and to just enrich myself, self-actualization? Or am I going to university because I want to be valued and valuable in the marketplace? And we're going to have to re-separate that. So what we are going to see is less people ultimately getting tertiary degrees, because those are not market useful skills. This is a personal passion over here. And we're going to see more people getting shorter term skills, because also what happens with automation is whatever skill you invest in has a shorter half-life, in other words, relevance in the marketplace, which means we have to keep on reskilling, which means it makes no sense to invest 4 or 5 or 10 years now, because many people are getting master's degrees before they even go into the workplace, on a skill set that's only going to last for 10 years. It makes much more sense to go study for 6 months, learn a very particular skill, master that in the marketplace. A year later, go do another 6 months of education, and seeing education as throughout your career rather than all banked up front that's just simply not going to deliver any of that value to you or to the marketplace over the longer term. So we need to reframe and unlearn our learning and understanding about what education is. And of course, there's so much cultural and political history, particularly in our country, about the value and the self-esteem that comes from getting a degree.
Exactly.
But if a degree is not serving you, we've got to stop serving that certification and make sure that the education that we invest our time and our money in is serving us and our ends. And that means we as individuals have to be very clear on our reasons for education. Is it self-fulfillment? Is it a means to getting ahead in the economy? And those different tracks, once we separate them, open up so much more opportunities for better creation of those skills that we're talking about that we need.
Definitely. But it's huge, hey? And because there are so many different, especially in the education space, so many different role players, so many different stakeholders, it is so intricate. I'll never forget, I mean, when I was teaching, one of the things that used to happen is some teachers would go, it's okay, I can definitely understand that the curriculum sucks or whatever it is, whatever words people used to use, but focus on teaching how to learn as much as, yes, the learning, the curriculum, the knowledge, but how to learn. Teach the skill of learning, because that's what's going to serve them over the long term. But this is the thing. It's the capacity to manage that, because then also that balance needs to be struck by you in the classroom and still be able to deliver everything. I was called to the principal's office. I think it was the year that I left my teaching. And I'm such a good girl. But I was called to the principal's office, I think the year or the year before. And because I used to teach a very practical natural sciences and technology subject, Miss Njapa, we came into your classroom, and during project time, some kids were sitting on the carpet, some were standing at the back working on their projects, there was music. We can't have that. Can't have that. It's chaotic. And I think that was the moment when, even after having conversations with colleagues, you really do understand that coming into the education space, you really are so excited about making a change. You're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. You understand, like you were saying, that beautiful integration that needs to happen. But over time, you start to realize just how intricate it really is, because you do have a curriculum that is defining exactly what needs to be covered. You do have everyone being funneled in from, in the case of universities, being funneled in from high school, and it's almost like having to manage what's already been built. So how would you say that the different stakeholders almost need to work with each other? Where does it actually start? Or is it for now, at least for the next 10 years, just about parents and their capacity to teach how to learn as well, alongside what needs to be learned?
I'm glad you mentioned parents, because like this is ultimately who is responsible for the little person in your life. It is you as the parent. It's not, as maybe you don't want to hear that, but ultimately we've tried so much to outsource our responsibility and the success of our children to the system. We think if we go to the right school and we pay the money, right? Yeah. We get the right certification, the right badge, the right certificate, the right school, your kids are going to be set for life. And that might have worked in the last century. It doesn't work anymore. And you have to put that extra effort into the sorts of life that you want, the sort of values you want your child to have, the sort of mindsets and curiosity about lifelong learning. Don't let your children think for a second school's going to be done by the time you're 21. It's not going to happen for future generations. People have to learn to be excited about continually learning throughout their lives, rather than seeing education as sort of like a trial and a life sentence you get before you get to be free. Like as soon as that's a story that a child is telling themselves about school. Yes. They're never going to be excited about actual self-development, about really learning skills, about really developing themselves and achieving all the things they can. So of course it starts in the home there. But it's also the fact that we do live in a society where we have a lot of state-subsidized school. The state determines what, as you said, that curriculum is. But that's going to have to shift too. Of course, the state shifts slower, but what does move faster is markets. So what we sort of foresee is happening with the education world is that it's going to come kind of top-down here, talking about sort of further down the life cycle of education. And that is the fact that the job market is really collapsing at the moment. There are less jobs. there are less defined salary jobs, more and more people are having to be independent. And if you are an independent person, I am, we run our own businesses, we do our own thing, you have to have skills, right? Or you can't survive. You have to have value. Certification doesn't allow you to survive as a freelancer. What allows you to survive is your skills and your value, right? So the demand side for education, like who's actually buying the skills that we have, that's our customers and our employers, are going to force change, because a certificate, doesn't get you a job. We know we've got these 800,000 graduates still on COVID relief grants. Yeah. These are graduates, right? These are the most privileged children in our society that still can't make it, right? So when that breaks down, and on, of course, the supply side, you're now unemployed or underemployed and frustrated, of course, you're not going to invest that time in that tertiary education, which means tertiary institutions, in order to survive, because yes, they are subsidized, but they also get a lot of money from the market and of course from students who pay their own way. It's not cheap. They will have to change in response to their demand, right? So the employee has to change in response to the market opportunities available, have to think differently about how you skill, how you certify yourself. Then they're going to put pressure on universities saying, I paid this money, I'm retiring with student debt, there's no freaking way I'm going to invest more money in you. You have to change. So universities will be forced to change in order to survive. This will start in the private sector, but of course then the public sector institutions will have to respond to the competition, because we know, of course, there's a competitive environment there, and that will trickle down into high schools, as parents are like, if my child is not going to do this traditional degree, they're going to have a more sort of flexible education that might extend over 20 years rather than 3 or 4 years. What sort of high school they need to prepare for that? High schools will shift. We've seen that with the increasing popularity of like online high schools and like self-learning journeys that allow you to graduate not just with the high school diploma, but also with some skills. Whether those skills are going to last you for 5 years or 50 years doesn't really matter, but you are able to earn some sort of income with your matric. Why should you only be able to be part of the job market after you've gone through this? So of course that question starts coming to parents and high schoolers and 17 and 18-year-olds looking at their own lives. So high schools will change. And then of course primary schools that feed into those systems are also going to change, and this will sort of trickle down the system. At the same time, there's a lot of pressure on sort of early education at the moment, the real basics of like feeding babies and teaching them the alphabets and making sure that they are able to learn, which is of course the other piece of pressure here. But our basic school system will probably be the last to change. But both the pressure from the early childhood and, of course, from the job market down will be the way these systems change. Less slowly than would be beneficial for our children. So again, as parents, you need to be constantly thinking about not how do I get my child a degree or into university? How do we get them that bachelor pass? Or how do we get to afford to send them to a good university? The question has to become, how do we raise children who are valued by society? Right? And that question, of course, comes back to how are you adding value to society? So if we are raising our children to constantly be thinking about how am I adding value to the world around me, they are always going to be successful people. I mean, you know this. Your clients hire you because you add value to them. Your value is different to the value I add, but you don't exist as a self-employed person unless you're adding value. And ultimately, we're all going to be self-employed. We've got to think of our career as ourselves, as an individual incorporated. Whereas before, we raised our children to think you've got to graduate, you've got to get a bachelor pass, you've got to get into university, you've got to get a degree, you've got to get a job. And that was how you got security. And those sort of stories and narratives that worked, that succeeded in giving you the support you needed to succeed 20 years ago, are now fundamentally detrimental to the success of your child over life, because it's the wrong question. It's not how do I get looked after, it's how do I look after myself.
Look after, and look after
others,
the marketplace.
Yes.
With the value conversation.
It's those two sides of value. How do I add value, and how to make sure that value I'm contributing is valued back? And that means demonstrating the value, proving you have skills beyond the certification.
Precisely. And that for me is sounding like a theme of our conversation, because and I like how you started it off with a bigger economic picture and how that from the private sector is going to cause the shift, or at least cause a little bit of pressure on that, because that's where value is changing. And if you think about how we've had school from the very beginning, it's only responding to what the marketplace is needing, or what society or what the economy is saying we need adults to need to be able to do or to perform or to provide.
Yeah. And also, ultimately, we're going to have to think about societies, what the purpose of school is. Like quite cynically, the purpose of schooling as we know it just comes out of the industrial era, where we needed parents to go to work, who's going to look after the children must go to school. At the same time, school can teach children to fit into society, to be an employee. So school was designed to teach children to be employees, number one, and to be submissive citizens, number two, right? So we probably do still need schools for social solidarity, for teaching common values, because of course we know people have very different values out there, and ultimately we all got to live together in a nation. But school, with the objective of raising employees, is a very flawed idea for the world we have right now. If school instead shifts to creating valuable members of society who have good values too, we have a very different syllabus that can emerge out of that, but it's a very different mindset. And of course, states are going to move slowly, but states that do move slowly are going to raise uncompetitive global citizens. And we are competing in a global world because technology is borderless.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, you cannot stop that. So our children have to compete with children in Saudi Arabia and in the United Arab Emirates, who now have free access to the professional version of ChatGPT. You know, we're going to be raising them against children like the Chinese children and the American children, who now are having AI first curriculums, right? Like, if your school system is only moving 10 years later, you're clearly not going to be raising children that are fit for that system. But at the same time, if school syllabuses are still focused on imparting knowledge rather than imparting the ability to learn, again, we're wasting an awful lot of time of our children, right? I mean, you're spending like 12 years in basic school. What are you actually getting out of it? Knowledge is commodified now, but how to use it, that's where the value lies.
Yeah. And I think anyone who's watching this, Bronwyn, or listening to this is going to go, oh my goodness, I see it, but this is extremely overwhelming. And so I want us to close off this discussion with going, where do you start? What are some of the key questions to ask, whether it's in terms of tapping into some curiosity, maybe it's the next staff meeting if you're a teacher, or maybe if you're a parent, it's your next look at the coming year as you prepare for the semester or the next quarter with your child. But what are the key questions for everyone to be asking as we prepare or jump into this shift around how education is changing around us, but also how we take accountability for that change?
I think we've got to start with saying, what do we actually want? Like what I raised earlier, is there something that's going to make me a better person? Is it for self-actualization, or am I wanting something out of it? And we've got to take a step back and say, why is this my goal? Why is this my goal for my child? Why is this my goal for myself? To what end are we doing this for, right? Why are we doing this? And once we question the why, we can see a whole lot of stuff that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing. That is a waste of time. So if you are a parent, you should be challenging the schools. I mean, you're paying those schools. Even if you're going to a government school, you're still paying. You're a taxpayer. You're still paying for the service. You're like, why are we doing this? Why are you teaching my child in this way? Why are we continuing with this program? This is clearly not going to be helpful in the future. And maybe schools have a reason. Okay, no, it's great. You have to learn about your common history, all of this. Great. Those are the sorts of subjects we should absolutely be studying. History of humanity. Children should be discussing this, you know, and learning and growing. But there's a whole lot of other things, like, why are you making my child memorize, this particular poem or whatever? What purpose is that? Oh no, maybe the purpose is to learn memory, right? To exercise those muscles. Okay, I understand.
I get it, yeah.
But then also question, like, why is the school insisting that the child takes these subjects? Why? Because those subjects get you a bachelor pass. But do I need a bachelor pass? My child is really technical. They're really interested in building things with their hands or in creating things in some other way. Like, why are we pursuing this goal if it's not a goal that's going to serve me, right? And just make sure that the education we do is serving us, that we're not just serving a system kind of blindly. So quite often there's two ways to look at this. There's a lot of structures that we've built that are there for a reason. So there's that metaphor, like the Chesterton's fence is the thing there. So like, he was a social philosopher, and he said, if you come across a fence in the field, you might think it's an ugly fence and just want to tear it down. But before you tear it down, figure out why that fence is put up. Oh, the fence is put up because a rampaging bull on the other side that comes and storms the field. That fence is supposed to be there, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to question before we tear things down. But at the same time, you come across a fence in the field and we're like, oh no, there was a bull there, but it died 30 years ago and we've just never taken the fence down. That's stupid, right? So you've always got to question why we did things in the past. Once we understand why we did them, we can see why if they are still relevant to serve us going forward. And I think the challenge for us in this country is also going to be to really challenge those inbuilt systems. We've got unions, we've got teachers with vested interests, we've got government officials with vested interests, we've got textbook printers with vested interests. We've got a whole lot of people there that are going to have to figure out a new place for themselves in a new system. Mm-hmm. And the way to sort of build futures cohesively is to understand that. It's not to say, okay, we can just throw all these people away with the old system. It's rather, how do we reskill those people that are supporting the system? How do we support teachers to teach in a new world? Otherwise, you're going to have resistance and you're going to have regressionary education systems in a world that's really progressing. We have to bring people along, and that's all the people, all the stakeholders in the system have to find a place and a role for themselves in the new story we're telling about what success looks like. Yeah. So the role as teacher, not as disciplinarian and like someone who forces you to learn things, but the role of a teacher as a mentor and a coach. That's empowering if you're a teacher. That's not scary that you're taking my job away, right? So we have to understand everybody is fearful of change, but at the same time, if we can have open conversations about why we're doing things, about why you want to hang on to this, we can bring more people along with us to support us throughout this new lifelong journey of learning. And that's, of course, great for teachers, by the way, if you're concerned about your job and unionization and all that. You know what? If school's not just for the first 12 years of your life, but school's for the 80 years of your expected life expectancy, your job is going to be just fine, right? So you see, this is why we have to have these conversations and reframe the things that we've taken for granted. And we can see that we can play with that. And there's so much opportunity out there if we just focus on every one of us, teacher, lecturer, university student, university operator. What value am I trying to get out? What value am I giving? And what value am I hoping to have and to give to society going forward?
And the clearer that is,
if everyone can answer that, this is the value I'm adding, this is why I should be valued, and this is what I need from you. Wow, that's how the economy is supposed to work. We all help each other along.
Yeah, in an ideal world.
In an ideal world.
But I think that's a great place to start, not just for parents and teachers like you spoke about, but also for the institutions themselves, whether it's the school governing body or it's the executive at the university, wherever it is. I think that's a great place to start having the conversation with curiosity, right? And not assuming that you do have all of the answers or that you understand. And looking into how you can expose yourself to more examples, case studies, conversations that you're not privy to in the moment or at the time. So where I want to close this conversation off, Bronwyn, is to understand, and you can just share with me really quickly, what's one skill that you think is the underpinning of all skills? I won't say necessarily the mother of all skills, but what I will say is, what skill do you think is going to be extremely critical? That whether we are an institution of higher learning or whether we are a primary school ECD center, where we're still playing with color blocks and paints, what's one skill that if we can just focus on honing, even as things move around us, the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 30 years are going to be just a little less frictional?
Yeah, I think you've already answered a bit about curiosity is obviously going to come with it. And that's, of course, the ability and the desire to keep on learning and to keep on going further down the rabbit hole. But there's another sort of side to that, and that is, of course, the ability to contextualize, right? So this is the difference between having a certification and having a skill that you can actually apply usefully, right? It's the ability to apply a skill in context. And what does that mean? It's the ability to identify a problem that someone is struggling with and to help them solve it. So that's the skill we should be teaching children, right? Like if you can just do it with yourselves while you're like playing with Lego blocks or whatever, and you can see somebody is looking for a pink block to complete their pink castle, can you help that person find that block? Now you are a useful peer, like even at that sort of level, right? And as you get further down the line, like what is the contextual problem of someone around you? Can you solve it? That is basically the definition of being valuable, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's exactly what we've been saying the entire time. I think that's brilliant. And I've never seen it from that perspective, and how that is definitely a very key skill, that whole ability to synthesize in the moment and to be able to create those links with what you have access to in the moment, and seeing how in the context that can add value. And it's never too soon to start with something.
No,
like
exactly.
That, right?
It's like you start in the playground. Like, how contextually, in this context, how can you be useful here? How can you help solve this problem?
Yeah, and you can leave school at any time at that point,
Yeah.
because
You're always going to be useful. That's the sort of person that gets hired to join startups or starts their own startup, because that's, of course, what problem solving is, right? So can you identify in context an ability to solve someone else's problem?
And I guess maybe to go right back to where we started, Bronwyn, maybe that's the weight of the qualification that it still holds in today's world.
Exactly.
Is that
How do I
unless I
use it?
get to that point, I'm not valuable. And because the skill of how to be valuable wasn't taught, you were just taught that the qualification is valuable. And so now you're
But
associated.
you, it's making you valuable, not the certification valuable. Ultimately, the certification is just a proxy. The real value lies with yourself, if you've chosen to take it on board, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Bronwyn, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Unlearners, for tuning into this episode of the Unlearners podcast, talking all about qualification versus skill, the true leverage of the future, the true currency of the future. And I think that this one was super valuable, whether you are coming in from one of the stakeholders in the education space. You're a teacher, you are a lecturer, you're a professor at a university, and maybe you're just a student or anyone else who plays some kind of a role or has an interest in the space. I think this was a deeply valuable conversation for you to take away today. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you very much, Bronwyn, for being here. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Unlearners podcast. Bye for now.
The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow. Learn, change, grow. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.